In mythology, every deity is always assigned some obligatory attributes, sacred animals, colors, patterns, symbols, so or otherwise distinguishing it from this or another god or goddess. With the help of such attributes, ancient artists, sculptors, writers indicated their relationship to this or that god. These attributes were, and remain to this day, the most important elements of symbolism. For example, if an eagle was depicted on a coat of arms or flag, it was a clear hint of support for Zeus, whose main symbol it is. However, there are both obvious and hidden or forgotten symbols that still point to this or that god or goddess. But for the majority of people, they mean nothing, or it is believed that there is no connection between them. Let's now talk about one of such symbols, or rather, the connection of a symbol with a specific god. You are on the Epoch of Distrust channel with Mikhail Kalmykov, and I want to clarify right away that this is not a usual video, but additional promised material to the second episode of the film What's Wrong With You, Russia? If you haven't watched it, you will inevitably feel confused, wondering why this video is needed at all, who and what I'm trying to prove here, and most importantly, why. The thing is, in the previous video, a significant part of the evidence base relies on the assertion that the lion is the totemic, sacred symbol of the goddess Hera. However, we know that her classic symbols are the diadem, a kind of crown symbolizing that she is the chief among the goddesses. Her symbols also include the girdle of Venus, the fruit of the pomegranate, a scepter with a cuckoo, the cuckoo itself, and sometimes the violet flower. And her totemic animal is always considered to be the peacock, but there is no mention of the lion, so why did I decide that the lion is her second totemic animal? And then also linked all this with England? This very video is dedicated to this, so I consider it additional material. Although in this film you will see a lot of new and shocking things, for example that Hercules possibly was black, what was the statement about the plot? Or do I really have grounds to think so? Or where did the name England and the name Britain come from? What do they mean? Where exactly do the centaurs live? And a lot more interesting things, but all in good order. After all, the main purpose of the video, as I said, is to explain the lion as the totem animal of the goddess Hera. To do this, first you need to understand how certain attributes or animals become part of the symbolism of the gods. Well, look, Hera has several classic attributes: diadem, cuckoo, Venus's girdle, peacock. Why exactly these? Let's start with the diadem. Here, everything seems pretty clear. The diadem is purely a female variety of the crown, and since Hera is the main goddess, the diadem suits her. Where would she be without it? But with other attributes, it's a bit more complicated. For example, the girdle of Venus, a magical attribute that makes her irresistibly sexual. But the problem is that, as the name suggests, this girdle belongs to another goddess, Venus or Aphrodite. That is, the goddess of love and beauty. It's her personal attribute, but for some reason it's also mentioned as an attribute of Hera. And the whole focus is on the mythological episode where Hera borrows this girdle from Aphrodite, that is Venus, for a while. And she puts it on to seduce and distract her own husband from what's happening in the Trojan War, and thus give the other gods a chance to intervene in the battle on the side of the Greeks. In other words, any attribute becomes a symbol not only by right of possession, but also by right of its use at any key moment in history. Let's check. The next attribute or symbol is a cucumber. It is also connected with the story of how Zeus, in love with the young Hera, turned into a cucumber which she caught. That is, Zeus somehow ended up in her hands. After this, Zeus and Hera secretly married on the island of Crete in the palace of Knossos, secretly. Because at that moment Zeus was officially married to another, and then their family life was extremely ambiguous and turbulent. Zeus was simultaneously married to others, and when, in the end, Hera finally became his official wife, Zeus repeatedly cheated on her. In fact, she did the same to him. But thanks to this story, with the transformation into a cucumber, the scepter with a cucumber on top, the dead grip clutched in Hera's hand became her next attribute, as if symbolizing that no matter what new lover appears for Zeus, the power over him still belongs to Hera. Her next obligatory attribute is the peacock. And it also didn't appear just like that. A whole fascinating story is also associated with it. And of course, it is associated with the love affairs of Zeus and the place of Hera. And this story perhaps is worth looking at in more detail. One of Zeus's lovers was Io, the daughter of the king of the Greek city of Argos, that very Io, in honor of whom the closest to Jupiter, that is, according to Greek classification, to Zeus, is named. The planet, now being torn apart by the tidal forces of the largest planet in the solar system. So, when Zeus was once again pleasantly and comfortably spending time with a young lover, Hera, suspecting something was amiss, decided to pay them an unexpected friendly visit. But somehow Zeus anticipated the unfavorable turn of events, and at the last moment, just before her arrival, he turned his young lover into a white cow. A brilliant plan, one might say. Here comes the furious wife with the intention to exact bloody vengeance and judge the unfaithful husband and his mistress, while the husband calmly walks on the grass in the meadow and grazes cows. Brilliant! But you won't fool the blacksmith Hera that easily. By herself, she suspected that someone wants to deceive her. But in the absence of direct evidence of change, she nonetheless decided to postpone judgment until direct clues appear. To be precise, she simply wanted to turn Zeus's plan into her twisted place. She forced her husband to give her this cow and set it out to pasture. The origin of this giant, Argus panoptis, is quite unknown. There are many different versions, even among ancient authors. For example, Aeschylus and Acusilaus believed that he was the son of the goddess Gaia. Pherecydes considered him the son of Aristaeus. Asclepiades considered him the son of Inachus. Pseudo-Apollodorus and Circe considered him the son of Argus. More precisely, in one case he was considered the son of Argus, who in turn was the son of Zeus and Niobe, and in another case he was the son of the king of the city of Argus, Agenor. Such an unimaginable mixed pickle. Argus the watchman, born in the city of Argos, guarded the princess of the city of Argos, who was locked in the body of a cow. But in reality, all this mess can be easily deciphered. Look, the giant was many-eyed. He had dozens of eyes, if not hundreds, and while half of the eyes were awake, the other half slept. And, on the contrary, doesn't it remind you of anyone? Then, I remind you, the giants had many children of Hecatoncheires, who, in addition to hundreds of hands, also had 50 heads each, naturally, a pair of eyes each, so this giant could well be one of the Hecatoncheires, the children of Gaia. This is confirmed by those authors who record him in the children of Gaia. That's right, she gave birth to such strange titans. Especially since in some pictures and vases he does have several heads. And other mentions of his origin could refer to the place he originally protected or that belonged to him. It is named, in fact, after his name Argus. That is, most likely, not the Titan was named in honor of the city of Argus, but on the contrary, the city and the place Argus were named in honor of the territory that belonged to him. Then everything falls into place. It's quite possible that sometimes he fell asleep or went away for a very long time, and his next awakening or arrival was recorded as a new birth. This also explains why he began to serve Hera, protecting the princess and not the queen of Argos, whose daughter she was and to whom he, in theory, should have been subordinate. If he had been the son of the king of Argos, after all, she would have been his sister, in fact. So, this many-eyed child guarded the enchanted princess until the super agent Hermes, sent by Zeus, appeared to him. This agent 007 put a lot of effort to put the Titan to sleep. It was very difficult because he had dozens and hundreds of eyes, falling asleep at different times, and all had to be put to sleep at once. Nevertheless, it was successful. Moreover, for this Hermes had to tell the story of the master's love for Naiad, which was considered a soporific tale at the time. But we now understand perfectly well with you that it was nothing else but an ancient Santa Barbara in 5,000 episodes. Some directors still use this technique to lull the viewers to this day. As soon as Vulcan fell completely asleep, Hermes killed him. But this only freed Io the cow from surveillance. It did not restore her human form. Then the cow began to wander the world, escaping from the miraculous gadfly which she sent to her in revenge for Argos's death. Hera, the Ionian Sea, is named after Io, which for a long time wandered in the guise of a cow along it. Then she crossed the Bosporus, which, by the way, is also named in her honor. In translation, Bosporus exactly means cow's ford. By the way, it's interesting that we have two such straits of Bosporus. One separates Europe and the Near East, the Black Sea and the Mediterranean, and the other is now called the Kerch Strait and separates the Azov Sea and the Black Sea. This is connected with the fact that the legends about Io and her wanderings in the form of a white cow contain two versions of her route. Interestingly, both versions are presented by the same Greek author, Aeschylus, in his work The Suppliants. She moves along a short, generally accepted route that passes through the Turkish Bosphorus and then down the Mediterranean Sea to Egypt. That is, she was always moving along the shore. But in another work, Prometheus Bound is much more interesting. She moves along a longer route through the Kerch Strait, further east, beyond the Caspian Sea, which at that time, as we know, was much larger than it is now. And then it moves to those places that even the Greeks themselves did not know about. At some point, she reaches the rock to which the Titan Prometheus is chained, that is, to the very edge of the world. And he, Prometheus, tells her exactly where she can find the human oblique in Egypt. Indeed, she turns around and heads there. This version, I think, is more interesting as it immediately closes many dark spots and gaps in the story. Look, Io is in the form of a white cow. She went through Crimea, and it was called Tavrum, that is the Cow Island. Then she crossed the Kerch Strait, and it was called Bosporus, that is the Cow Ford. Then she went further, to the edge of the earth beyond the Caspian Sea, and somewhere there she found chained Prometheus, who, by the way, was also the king of the Scythians. So it also quite fits. Then she turns back to Egypt and, very likely, passes through India, both through the real modern India and through the mythical India Tartar. And again, in a surprising way, it is in India that the cow is considered sacred. Not only that, it is in India that white cows are specifically widespread. Of course, all this looks like a strange coincidence, but let's not forget that all the time, while she was wandering in the form of a cow, Hera was following and pushing her with the help of a gigantic ovoda. And India, or rather the modern subcontinent of Indostan, definitely has some relation to Hera, since her sacred animal is the peacock, which just happens to live in India. Can we assume that Hera in some way warned the Hindus not to cut and eat this cow since a man is enchanted in it and the mother of future heroes? If we take mythology seriously, then of course it is possible, because Hera needed to preserve the cow's life at any cost in order to fix the moment of her transformation back into a man and present Zeus with the fact of change. A simple murder of a competitor makes it unprovable, and there is always a chance to make a mistake and kill an innocent animal. Moreover, the pantheon of Indian gods fits very well into Greek mythology. In part, we have already made an assumption with you in the last series that many Indian gods are simply Greek titans of Gekat and Heres, but here is another coincidence for you. The goddess Hera can quite possibly turn out to be an Indian goddess. Kali. Yes, at first glance, nothing in common, however. In Indian mythology, she beheads her husband, Shiva, and simultaneously it's human. But so, during the period of Hera's journey through India, she was in a state of great anger at her husband. It's quite possible that Io could have visited and thoughts about his murder. What a vengeful woman is incapable of. And here appears the first toothy, indeed noticeable link of Hera with the symbol of the lion, since the usual attire of Kali is a throw from the leopard's skin. Yes, of course. A leopard is not a lion, but it is still from the cat family, and characteristically, the word leopard came from the combination of two words, Leo and Pardus, where Pardus means jumping, and Leo, well, you guess, of course, lion. That is, a leopard in translation is a jumping lion. By itself, the Hindus have their own name for the leopard Tendua, which in Sanskrit means simply sharp-toothed, and in this form the connection with the lion is lost. But the point is that Leopardus is a specifically ancient Greek name, and in this case there is some kind of noticeable ghostly connection in the Greek reading. But let's get back to the oddities, and about in the form of a white cow. After India, she finally reaches Egypt, where Zeus bewitches her, and she gives birth to the future king Epaphus, who will build the city of Memphis and generally rule in Egypt. By the way, according to Aeschylus, it is this son of Io, and became the first dark-skinned man in history. He writes so in the tragedy Prometheus Bound in the words of Prometheus addressed to the wandering cow Io. Near the mouth of the Nile, among the reeds, there from the madness, Zeus will extract you, having touched you with his hand, tenderly, and you will give birth to dark-skinned Epaphus, the child of touch, and he will rule over all the land that the wide Nile waters. Well, that is, if translated into understandable Russian, you give birth to the founder of the dark-skinned race, whose land will become all of North and Central Africa. And his distant descendant will be Hercules, who will free Prometheus. By the way, it turns out that Hercules was black-skinned, a very interesting nuance. In particular, Aeschylus writes in the words of Prometheus like this, "And 5 ages will pass, and 50 sisters." Obviously, the dark-skinned ones will return to Argos, not wanting to enter into marriage with their twofold brothers in Egypt. And since there were apparently no other candidates, they returned to the homeland of their great-grandmother Io. There, they quickly got wives, who, however, were almost all killed later. In general, even Prometheus says literally, "To tell in detail is a long business, but this family will give that important arrow from the bow, which will relieve me of my torments." So, returning to Io, Hera did not leave her in peace even after the death of the Titan Argus. The ghost of Argus, in the form of a dog, haunted her until the end of her life. Well, Hera placed the 100 eyes of Argus on the tail of the peacock, which had enough space for this, and left the peacock by her side. Apparently to watch over the situation instead of Agus, or in memory of the slain Agus. That's an interesting story about how the peacock became a sacred obligatory symbol of Hera. Thus, the symbolism of those or other gods is born from events in which gods participate and about which ancient storytellers, poets, and priests tell us. This means that to prove the connection of the lion symbol with Hera, it is necessary to find a specific event. We have already found something. When I was telling about Kali and the leopard, the story is strange. The connection between the goddess Kali and Hera is very toothy, literally ghostly. Therefore, we will not use it as the main and only evidence, but rather look for something more serious. Unfortunately, someone diligently protects everything, even the smallest traces and hints, so we have to look not only for the stories themselves, but also their traces, mentions of them. And here, I immediately want to tell the skeptics that such a method is quite scientific. For example, the poem of Aethiopis, written by Actinus of Miletus, I have already mentioned it in previous episodes about the War of the Gods, so this poem did not reach us, it is completely lost. More precisely, only 2 fragments of 3 to 4 lines each have survived, and they are very, very damaged. However, historians consider Aethiopis a full-fledged epic as there are references to it in other poems and publications. Thanks to them, we know the approximate content of this poem. I also believe that I have the right to refer to sources that contain references to now unknown, hidden or lost works. Yes, I'm referring to Jordan Bruno, about whom I have an entire separate film. I'll remind you that Jordan was not just a wandering monk, but received a splendid church education. He served in the church for a long time and read a huge amount of ancient materials, including Aeschylus and other Greek philosophers and poets. Moreover, Greek mythology was one of his favorite topics, so he knew it inside out, and this knowledge was repeatedly demonstrated during interrogations. And so, in one of his last books, the writing of which was blamed on him, by the way, he just described the plot we are looking for. The book is called Ignition of the Tormented Beast, and it devotes several pages to the episode where the Greek gods of Olympus fought with a mysterious, miraculous beast that came from the Tavri caves, that is, from Crimea. None of the gods could defeat him, and then a proposal was made to turn into beasts in order to sneak up on the monster unnoticed. Bruno insists that it was precisely thanks to this transformation that the Egyptians began to see gods in the forms of half humans, half animals. Of course, Bruno could have made it all up, but in this case, any myth, any story of ancient authors can be considered a fabrication, which in turn leads to a complete revision of the entire history. But we see that throughout all past centuries and even up to the present time, great importance is attached to ancient myths. Their motifs are still used in world symbolism. And so I dare to think that Jordan Bruno did not take this plot off the shelf. Moreover, not a single judge during the interrogation accused him of lying about this episode, which once again suggests that Jordan had solid materials to think so. Therefore, I consider them a direct reference to the now lost or hidden texts. Another circumstantial confirmation of this episode was preserved in Egypt. There, among other things, the widespread cult of the goddess Hathor as well as Ayan-O was prevalent, appearing in the form of a cow, just like I Oh, she was the wife of the supreme god. In some cases Ra, and in some cases Horus, which is not particularly important for us now, since the symbol of both is a falcon, analogous to an eagle, and this in any case associates him with Zeus. In general, there is a lot of confusion in Egyptian mythology. The same Hathor appeared in the form of a cow, but there is her other fiery, warlike aspect, and it is in the form of the lioness Sekhmet. That is, when she is kind, she is a cow, and when she is evil, she is a lioness. But the exact same image of a kind lioness is the goddess Bast. It creates the impression that there were two lionesses. One of them was more of a cat than a lioness, and the other hid behind the image of Hathor and didn't shine much. So there was confusion. But we do know for sure that Zeus was in that battle in the form of an eagle or a falcon, but in what other form could he possibly be? Then the Egyptian Anubis, the god of the dead, was certainly the embodiment of the Greek Hades. By the way, the totem animal of Hades is the three-headed dog Cerberus, just as Anubis has a dog's head. The Egyptian Bastet, most likely, was the embodiment of Artemis, the Greek goddess of hunting, whose embodiment and totem animal is a cat. Sebek the crocodile could well be the embodiment of Poseidon. The most important thing is that Sekhmet is the Egyptian goddess of fury, the bloodthirsty goddess. A lioness does not fit the image of Bastet or Artemis at all. And it also does not fit the image of Hathor and Io, but it fits very well with Hera or Kali. I remind you, in Greek mythology, there are several gods responsible for fierceness. These are minor gods like Lyssa and Olympians, specifically Ares and Hera, but the role of Sekhmet fits Hera more. In particular, she was the one who, in moments of fierceness, lost control over herself, and in this state could commit unspeakable atrocities over people, could bring miraculous misfortunes, and could not calm down on her own. This makes her similar to both Kali and Sekhmet. There is even a known episode when Sekhmet could not be calmed down at all. A special red-colored lake was created just for her, made of wine and a special potion, which Sekhmet mistook for a sea of blood and greedily drank. As a result, she got drunk, fell asleep, and calmed down. All these bloodthirsty acts, drinking from a sea of blood, do not fit with Hathor, the cow mother goddess, but they perfectly suit the vengeful and ruthless Hera. So, there is a whole big story, even two stories, each of which can justify Hera with the lion. But we know these stories indirectly, through very transparent and ghostly hints. In the first case from Aeschylus, in the second case from Giordano Bruno. And even if this is not direct evidence of the connection of the lion image with the hero, it is certainly a reason for further investigation. By the way, why did Zeus end up in Egypt at all? However, this question is not as simple as it seems at first glance. Look, on the one hand, he, of course, could just forget about the input-output and go about his business, while she suffers there in the form of a cow and ultimately just ends her life in it. Yes, it's harsh, but no dissection, no changes, no risk. And the girl who died because of him, well, she is after all just a human. But in reality, it didn't happen like that. Zeus sent Hermes to stealthily kill Argus and free her from captivity. Then, by itself, it needs to be enchanted, because such efforts are not just for nothing. The one who said it would speak, but he himself could not get rid of the madness to do this, and no one else was strong enough to do this, except perhaps the mother of all gods. Her, and most likely her thoughts were not as chaotic as it seems. She went to seek the edge of the land Tartar, most likely specifically in search of him. On her way, she ended up in Crimea Taurida, where possibly she met him or someone who had a connection with her. A Gaia, as we know, is a strict woman. She doesn't just give birth to gods, she does it for some purpose. And her first husband, who destroyed all her creations. She overthrew Uranus with the help of her son Kronos. Then Kronos was overthrown by Zeus, and then, in a blink of an eye before the Trojan War, she sent a half of the giants, whom no single god could destroy, to overthrow Zeus and the Olympians. So perhaps it was her who was awakened in Crimea and stirred up the same wonder, one of the first, with which all the gods in the forms of animals hopelessly fought in Egypt. This information is lost from us, but in the times of Giordano Bruno, whenever he lived, it was still there and no one argued with it. This nuance beautifully explains why Zeus with his team was in Egypt, why he couldn't get distracted, and why Hera still pretended to forgive him and allowed him to curse input-output. Why did they even need to turn into animals to sneak up to the miracle? Yes, the monster simply mistook Io and Argus, or maybe just Argus. It didn't touch ordinary animals, only gods. But don't forget, we still don't have the actual artifact, so this is just my imagination and assumption. And so now let's try to approach our question from a different angle, with history, with broad strokes, looking through the prism of symbolism, not human actions. And let's start perhaps with England, because it is her that I associate with the patronage of Hera. England. So, until the 3rd century of our era, not much is known about Britain. There's confusion with the dates and inhabitants. Currently, we're not very interested in this. But after that, the invasion of the Roman Empire on the island began. First, there were the feeble attempts of Gaius Julius Caesar, and 100 years later, in our era, the full-scale invasion of Emperor Claudius. That is, if you look at it from a symbolic point of view, it was the spread of Zeus's power. But for some reason, the Romans left there in the 1st century Anno Domini. It is believed that they left due to frequent raids by the Picts and Scots and under the pressure of the Huns. Then the Celts migrated there en masse, followed by numerous Germanic tribes. The history is murky, with much left to uncover. The main thing is that the full-fledged history of England or Great Britain as a state began approximately in the beginning of the 6th century of our era. The British Isles began to be colonized en masse by the Germanic tribes of the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes. And by the 10th century of our era, England represented a more or less unified state. That is, the key moment in the creation of England was its conquest by Germanic tribes. Everything seems logical, but the established theory begins to falter a bit. If you recall that the Germanic tribes closely collaborated with the Roman Empire, Germanic warriors were some of the best mercenaries. Thus, the departure of the Roman Empire from the British Isles at the end of the century, and then their conquest by the Germanic tribes at the beginning, can be boldly considered a simple return of the Roman Empire, but under a different sauce. However, it is striking that just at the end of the century, the territory of Western Europe was civilized by the Roman Empire, as reported by Gaius Julius Caesar himself. And then, after a decade, some Germanic tribes suddenly appear. The very word tribes immediately evokes associations with some kind of savagery. But in reality, all this looks like a simple transfer of power, from direct rule by Rome, that is, by Zeus, to the hidden rule of his spouse, Hera. By the way, why were the Germanic tribes called Germanic? The first thing that comes to mind is the combination of two words Hera and man, the man of Hera. But it can't all be that simple. There is a version that the word Hera in some ancient Germanic language means spear, and in combination with man, it means warrior. In French, guerre means war, which is also close to warrior. The problem is that these are just versions that are absolutely not confirmed by anything. For example, there is another version in Wikipedia that it comes from the Celtic Geir, which means neighbor. Well, first of all, where is Geir and where is Germany? And secondly, this version also carries a shield of probability. That is not true, not even close. One thing is known for sure. The first name of the Germans was used by Julius Caesar in his notes on the Gallic War. Moreover, from the very first lines, from the very first page, Gaius Julius Caesar lists the main European tribes and gives them characteristics. And from these lines we can notice a few interesting nuances that can help us in the future. In particular, he calls the Belgians the bravest and most courageous tribes and says that they are so brave because the quote lives further away from the province, with its cultural and enlightened life. What does this phrase mean? On the one hand, it's clear they live far from everyone in the province of Decari. But first of all, this means at the very least that even before the start of Caesar's great wars with the Gauls, there was definitely a cultural exchange between the Roman Empire and the farthest northern corners of Europe. And he was very serious as he had a strong influence on people. The second oddity is that although Caesar lists the Germans in his book, he considers the most remote from the province of Belgae, even though the Germans are further away on the map. Why am I saying this? Yes, due to the fact that cultural exchange between the Roman Empire, Germany, and for example, Greece, judging by everything, was much more intense than many of us are used to thinking. The Germans, Gauls, and Celts, it seems, were not so wild after all. This implies nomadism and mythology. Why do some tribal names stand on the maps of those times? For example, the Cantabrian tribes in the north of Spain. Many people know about these tribes, but read the inscription more carefully. It can also be read differently, like Kentavri or Centavri. Now only the Cantabrian mountains remain from them in the north of Spain, and the former Cantabrian Sea is now called the Bay of Biscay. Or the tribe of Taurishi, living in the territory of modern Austria, Czech Republic, and Slovakia. Read this name, considering that the letter C in Italian is read as Cech. And somehow these incomprehensible Taurishi suddenly turn into Tavrisha or Tovarisha. And yes, it is in these places, according to official history, that the Slavic tribes lived. Comrades Slavs, interesting, isn't it? On the one hand, it's simple, but on the other hand, it leaves a strong impression of some historical farce. In general, one way or another, there was a cultural exchange. Cities and luxury items were also present among these so-called tribes, and the mythology was, accordingly, common. So Hera could very well have ruled over these territories, and the name German is simply a man of Hera, German, which does not exclude the fact that a German is a warrior, since Hera is a very warlike lady. And again, all this appears as a severe stretching of Sava onto the globe. Well then, meet Germany, Thuringia, the city of Hera. What does this name mean and how did it come about? And no one knows, and when this city was founded, and that too no one knows. But the first mentions of it date back to the end of the 10th century. And this city also has a coat of arms. Here it is. Do you know whose feathers? Correct, Pauline's, that is the hare's, and here are the lions next to it. And if you still think that peacock feathers are here just because they are beautiful, then pay attention to the fact that half of the feathers on the coat of arms have characteristic peacock eyes, and the other half do not. This is a symbol of Pauline's transformation after the death of Argus. Before the death of Argus, Pauline did not have these drawings on her tail, and it was Hera who placed them here. This is an extraordinarily fat hint that the city of Hera is named specifically in honor of the goddess Hera, not just some coincidence. So, There is a very ancient city of Hera in the country of Hera, Germany, having its symbol attribute of Hera, unknown by whom and when it was built. Are you sure this is all exactly a coincidence? Nevertheless, it is on this coat of arms that we first encounter the attribute of Hera, Pauline, Pear, and Lion simultaneously. And we also know that it was these tribes that founded modern England. This note could have been the end of it. There are enough arguments linking the British, Lubo, and Hero to at least consider this version seriously. But there's something else, an unknown goddess. The thing is, in the symbolism of Britain, a certain goddess is clearly and unequivocally depicted, who is her official patroness. She is depicted on many ancient and modern coins of Britain. A monument to her is established in Plymouth, Devon County. By the way, notice the similarity with the Russian word Deva. Yes, actually, the very name of the state of Britain is named in her honor. Yes, if you've ever wondered why Britain is called Britain and what this word means, here's your answer: Britain. This is the name of the goddess, and with her all the necessary attributes, including the British lion. There's just one problem: such a goddess doesn't exist in either the Roman or Greek pantheon. Then who is she? Let's break it down using the example of the monument piece by piece. The first spear is depicted differently, sometimes without a spear, in a female tunic, sometimes in a Greek linen thorax. Distinctive features of the linen thorax in the last film. The second helmet is also ancient Greek, specifically a Corinthian helmet. The third weapon is a trezubets. 4, an oval shield. 5, always next to a carved lion. So, according to the identification by weapons and armor, this is unequivocally a Greek goddess. Many researchers also wondered what her name was. There were versions that this is Athena Pallada, Minerva Fetida, but her full-fledged image does not fit anyone. There is another version, according to which it is believed that this is the ancient Irish word for the goddess Brigitta. Translated from ancient Irish, Brigitta means simply supreme, supreme goddess, that is, as if it is an Irish name. But the problem is that the Anglo-Saxons and other Germanic tribes began to settle in England from the end of the 5th to the beginning of the 6th century. That is, if it was specifically an Irish or another their English or even German goddess, then she would have appeared accordingly at the end of the 5th, beginning of the 6th century, not earlier. But the thing is that this goddess came specifically from the Romans. Her image on Roman coins is found even during the reign of Emperor Hadrian. That is, before the Romans even began to try to conquer the Germans, and even more so 400 years before the Germans settled on the shores of Britain and named it Britain. And yet, official historians do not personify this goddess at all and call her simply a collective image of the goddess. Now let's sort out this mess. And so there exists a certain Greek goddess who does not want to advertise her name, but whom everyone knows and fears. In the north, they even start to bow to her, and in her honor, they name a whole nation of Germans. By the way, Hercules also got his name in her honor, but that's another story. Next to the Germans, another people settle, who are named in honor of Hera's daughter. Guess what her name is? Correctly, Angela. That is, her people are the Angles. And here are these two peoples, the Angles and the Germans, the people of Hera and the people of the Angels. At the end of the 5th and the beginning of the 6th century, they moved to an island that was named in honor of the mother and daughter. Simultaneously, England and Britain. Ah, yes, stop. Why Britain? We were talking about Hera, but why in Irish? As I already said, Bridget is the supreme goddess, and who is our supreme Greek goddess in the pantheon? Of course, Hera. Who else? Her The position of the monument speaks directly that the goddess is Greek. Now, about the fact that she has a trident and a shield in her hands, which goddess has the audacity to take away Poseidon's trident only from the supreme goddess, Zeus's wife, and by coincidence also Poseidon's sister, and the shield, what does it mean? Here it's even simpler. Have you ever heard the word aegis, for example? Someone is under the aegis of the United Nations, or someone else, and under the word aegis. This is a special name for Zeus's personal shield. She is under the aegis of her husband Zeus, under his shield, which, by the way, has Roman styling. If you look, well, that's it, actually, and everything. Britain and England are unequivocally a country under the rule of Hera, and the lion is her symbol. Thank you for your attention. The continuation follows. The continuation follows. The subtitles were created.